Hello, everybody. Hello and welcome to our Siyyum on Tractate Nedarim. This is being hosted by My Jewish Learning. My name is Rachel Scheinerman, and I edit My Jewish Learning, and it's delightful to see some familiar faces on the Zoom, and I think some new ones as well. Please feel free to tell us who you are, where you're coming from. The format of this session is that I'm going to say a few introductory words on Tractate Nedarim, and then we have three rabbinic experts to highlight a few passages from the tractate that we've studied. But as always, we welcome your comments and questions. We'll have a little time for them. So let me start by introducing our panelists. We are joined today by Rabbanit Dasi Fruchter. There she is. If you unmute yourself, I can highlight you. There you go. Rabbanit Fruchter is the spiritual leader of the South Philadelphia Shtibel, the teacher of a popular Daf Yomi class, and soon to be Daf Yomi podcast host. So look out for that. We are also joined by Rabbi Asher Lopatin.
Hey, hi everybody, Mazel Tov.
Rabbi Lopatin is the rabbi and founder of Kehilat Eitz Chaim, a Jewish community in Detroit, also the executive director of the JCRC-AJC in Detroit, and also a co-host of the Rabbi and a Lawyer Walk Into a Bar podcast. We're highlighting all of our experts' podcasts today in this introduction. And finally, we are joined by one of our regular writers, Rabbi Elliot Goldberg. He also frequently teaches the Daf Yomi and Review class on Thursday mornings for us. If you're not in it and you like 30 minutes of review of the week's Daf, I invite you to join us for that. Rabbi Goldberg, give us a wave.
Hi, everybody. Good to see you.
Rabbi Goldberg wears a lot of hats. He's in addition to being a regular writer for us, he is a coach and consultant for Jewish nonprofits and the co-host of the podcast Tov, which is all about Judaism and one of my favorite TV shows, The Good Place. Okay, so we're delighted to be joined by you all. We're going to hear from you in a few minutes, but first I'd like to just step back and think about this tractate begadol from a bit of a distance, the whole tractate. We've spent 3 months immersed in the concept of vowing. And I'd love to hear what you think about it, but let me just take 2 or 3 minutes to give you some of my thoughts. I thought this was a particularly interesting tractate because it really had us in our heads of something that most of us don't do most of the time. Most of us are not walking through the world making vows all the time. And one thing we thought about when we entered this tractate is why we're suddenly talking about vows in the middle of Nashim, the order of the Talmud that deals with women. And one explanation that's commonly given is that the last 2 chapters of the last 2 chapters of Nedarim deal with women's vows. So because women's vows can be annulled by their husbands or their fathers, it's logical to file it among information about women. But it also occurred to me as we approach the end of this tractate, and I'm curious what other people think, that coming on the tails of Ketubot, which is about marriage, vows have a lot of kinship to marriage, right? When in the traditional concept of rabbinic marriage, a man marries a woman, he consecrates her to him. And he makes her forbidden to other men. There's a lot of analogy here to what happens when we vow. Of course, he also takes obligations toward her, which is different, but the language of vowing similarly consecrates an object and renders it forbidden to oneself or to others, which I think makes it have an interesting resonance here in the middle of Nashim. Another thing that struck me, this is a few bullet points, things I thought about as we did this tractate. As I lived with this idea of vowing for the last 3 months, I was struck by how it concentrates an incredible amount of power into the hands of an individual. Any one of us, by simply uttering a sentence, can create a completely private religious obligation just between us and God. And that's frankly an almost divine-like power to speak a few words and create something of actual significance. It's almost like another aspect of us being B'Tselem Elohim, of being created in the image of God. God speaks and creates the world. We speak and the world is forever changed. Another thing that struck me is that this this idea of being in relationship with God through vowing is different from how I think a lot of us conceive of our Judaism today. Today, in Judaism, obligations are communal. Yes, they're incumbent on the individual, but they're usually incumbent on most individuals, right? If I might feel myself obligated to keep Shabbat or to keep kosher or to fast on Yom Kippur or to build a sukkah or visit the ill or give tzedakah, but I see myself as not the only one who has that obligation, right? That is an obligation for others in my Jewish community. But a vow is different. It's a private obligation. It's just between me and God. And I wonder if in studying this tractate, if maybe we can sit with that idea for a minute and think that this might perhaps be an underappreciated dimension of our heritage, right? Judaism really cares about community and communal obligation, but there's also room, I think, in Judaism that we see as we read this tractate in this idea that there are some things that are really significant and really serious and really just between us and our maker. Okay, one more thing that struck me, and Rabbanit Fruchter, I think, is going to talk about this too in a few minutes, and maybe you thought about this too as we went through this tractate, is that I was struck at the power of vows really seemed to spook the rabbis. They didn't like, I think, that a single individual can create such a serious obligation and therefore open the door so easily to transgression if they don't fulfill it. They worried that people would make vows lightly and not keep them and thereby bring more sin into the world. And we've discussed this in a couple of pieces in the series, but Kol Nidre, the communal annulment of vows that we say on Yom Kippur, has its roots in this tractate, right? Many of the rabbis thought it was safer for everyone to proactively annul all their vows for the year, so they couldn't accidentally or thoughtlessly or irreverently make vows that they wouldn't keep and therefore bring more sin into the world. And this gets at something I think we don't always talk about so much here, but it's worth thinking about, which is a kind of rabbinic elitism, right? The rabbis don't really trust the everyday person with this kind of enormous power. It makes them uncomfortable. All right, and one other thing that, so on the one hand, maybe they're being elitist, but on the other hand, maybe they have a point. And that it's a good idea to annul the vows ahead of time. And one way we can see why that might be a good idea is through the most colorful story in the Tanakh about vowing. So Stephen, if you're on the phone call, I promised you I would talk about this in the introduction. So here it is. The most colorful story about vowing in the Tanakh is the vow of Jephthah, which is found in the book of Judges. It's a tragic story, the long and short of which is that you have a judge which in the biblical era means a charismatic military or political leader. And he makes a poorly worded vow and he ends up having to sacrifice his own beloved daughter. And I think we can read that story as a cautionary tale about the incredible power of vows and the danger they carry with them. So maybe we don't have to read this as rabbinic elitism so much as really practical safeguards they have put in place for us. Okay, so I'm throwing all that on the table, but now I'm going to step back and invite you to comment, and we're going to hear from our experts. I'm going to leave you with one question I encourage you to answer in the comments if you feel comfortable, and that is, should vowing have a place in Judaism today? How or should we vow today? Have you ever been tempted to make a vow? Do you know someone who's made a vow? And as always, I'm also interested in your thoughts in general on this tractate. What stood out to you? What did you love? What troubled you? Please do share. We love to hear what you're thinking as well. All right, so I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to invite our panelists to share some things that stood out to them from the tractate. And this time we are going to start with Rabbi Asher Lopatin, who's going to talk to us about food.
Yes, thanks so much, Rachel. You know, first of all, when you make a vow, if you're tempted, always say bli neder, without a commitment. It's sort of like the Jewish way of crossing your fingers. So say bli neder, and it gets you out of all this mess. There's a lot of serious stuff in this tractate, and certainly the story of Yiftach is so serious. But I love the two chapters, 49a and 54a. Hanoder min hamevushal, if you make a neder from something cooked, does that, about something cooked, does that obligate you? You're allowed to eat roasted foods. Look, I love food. Food is great. I think that there's a little lighter side to Masechet Nedarim, that I guess sees the vow as just sort of a symptom of issues, maybe husband and wife, maybe parent, kid, maybe friends, maybe. And I just love, I think these two chapters bring out the lighter side of life. And again, it sort of leaps away from a little bit from the actual neder and the heaviness of vow and disavowing vows. So, cooked, do you like cooked food? Do you like broiled? Is it broiled? Is it cooked? What's considered cooked? What's considered broiled? There's actually a discussion of this regarding Passover, whether you can eat cooked foods that are not boiled and not broiled, a whole interesting discussion. So I just love this different kinds of ways of cooking and ways of preparing food, maisa kedeira, maisa ritcha, all sorts of ways of preparing food. Whenever you're talking food, it's a little bit more comfortable. And then I love, again, pickled foods are a reminder. And then I really love getting to hanoder min hayerek, if you make a vow not to have vegetables. That old debate that you might have with your friends of what's considered a vegetable and what's considered a fruit. No, did you realize it's a fruit? So the Tanakama says, you know what? A dalat, a pumpkin or squash or something like that, it's really a fruit. So it's always annoying when people are telling you all these different things that you think are vegetables are really fruits, but that's our Tanakama. Rabbi Akiva, he's a man of the people, says, no, don't. I know technically a squash or a pumpkin is a fruit. It has seeds in it. Thank you very much. But people think it's like a vegetable. So, it really takes you back to a kind of simpler life. What's considered a grain is like a pea, a kind of pea considered a grain. And then I think it's a very funny chapter. What is considered clothing? Is sackcloth considered clothing on 55b? If you're not going to be in the house, does that mean you can be in the loft upstairs? So on the one, it definitely reflects the seriousness of language, and that's so important. But on the other hand, it's sort of like, first of all, the rabbi's trying to get you out of the neder as much as they can, out of the vow, but also it's just so interesting, what is considered a bed, what is considered the city limit. So all these kind of words that we talk about that makes you think about the words, and but it's also just sort of I really feel this is a tractate of the people, because so much of it is about what people are thinking, what people are doing, the simple lives of people. Sometimes you're right, Rachel, it differentiates between a Talmid Chacham, the Talmidei Chachamim, who can make certain, get out of certain vows, whereas Amaratzim, the regular people, are not allowed to make certain vows, but or if they make it, they can, they have more trouble. So I just love those two chapters because they're really dealing with issues that kids will argue about, and even adults will argue about. And it comes to life. It sparkles more than some of the more technical tractates that really keep it on a very esoteric halachic level. This is, what do you consider a vegetable and what do you consider a fruit? What do you consider cooked and what do you consider roasted? So there's my dance through Nedarim.
Thank you, Rabbi Lopatin, especially for illuminating sort of the lighter side of some of this material, because the Talmud is not always deadly serious. And yeah, it puts us in people's homes and their personal lives in a certain way. Let me share some of the comments before we go on to our next presenter. So I asked people to share if they ever vowed in their lives or knew people who did. And Ruth Margolin shares that the summer that I worked in an ice cream shop, I needed to avoid too much sampling all summer. So I would vow each morning not to eat any ice cream. And unless I was specific with my language, I let myself eat sherbet. So that's a fun story of a specific vow someone made. The comments are also pointing out different circumstances in which one might make a vow. Rob Plass and Stephen, you both highlighted for us that vowing is often made in moments of anger, that many of the vows we saw in this tractate were made in moments of anger and they slipped out. And Elizabeth, you highlighted for us that vowing is sometimes made in haste without a lot of thought. And Sylvia points out that vows can be made in times of trouble, like we're trying to bargain with God. And in fact, we're going to move on to Tractate Nazir tomorrow, which is a very specific kind of vow that dedicates a person to be sort of in a pseudo-priestly-like status for a period of time. And the two most famous Nazirs in the Hebrew Bible, Samuel and Samson, both of them came upon their Nazirut in part because of their mothers were barren and so badly wanted children they were trying to bargain with God. Okay, and I wanted to see one comment that struck me. I'd like to hear more from Lyndall Miller. Can we put you on the spot for a sec? Because I had thrown something out in the beginning that said that vowing makes us B'Tselem Elohim, kind of like God. We speak and it has enormous power. But you wrote that you see it the opposite way. It shows how we are not like God. So I'm just curious if you're willing to illuminate that a little bit more. Ben, can we invite Lyndall to share her thoughts?
Okay. The reason I think it shows how we are not like God is because God makes all kinds of vows. I mean, the 10 Commandments are a vow. I'm thinking specifically about keeping Shabbat and all of those kinds of things. Whereas, again, going back to Rabbi Lopatin's comments, when we start to make vows, we have to think, is it clothes? Is it fruit? Is it this? Is it that? We get into all kinds of messy details. The rabbis basically tell us, don't do it. But God has made many, many promises. We have a brit. We have all kinds of things that we can count on. And yet we are fallible humans. And again, the point being made that people make a lot of these vows in anger. I mean, it gets to the ridiculous where the one we just had was the guy wearing clay because he, had to. Anyway, that's kind of where my thoughts went.
Okay. So the power that we have when we vow and speak is just a small fraction of the power of God's language.
And not advisable to use. Basically, It's the message, I think, that I got.
Advisable. Okay, thank you. Let's move next to our next presenter, Rabbi Goldberg. We said you would go next, correct?
Correct, you did.
Okay.
But you did not make a vow, so if you want to change the order, it works okay with me.
No, I try not to vow myself.
Okay, that's fine. I also want to heed, the rabbi's warning, like don't make vows, and Rabbi Lopatin's advice, say bli neder, so that you don't get yourself on the hook for making a commitment that you don't want to keep. But as I was thinking about this Masechet, I wanted to look for something to share today that was an area of life where we actually do what the Masechet is about, where we actually kind of make commitments. So I want to differentiate because I think the way in which we apply some of the lessons of this Masechet are not through vows themselves technically, but there are ways in which we make commitments to ourselves and to each other within Jewish living that jumps out of the Masechet and spoke to me a little bit today. I have a short passage. I'm going to share my screen because I brought the text for everybody to see. And I'm going to start the slideshow. This comes from the end of Amud Zayin, page 7b, and goes on to 8. There's a series of teachings where Rav Giddel is quoting Rav, and we're going to not see all of them, but we're going to see a couple in this section. But Rav Giddel says that Rav says, from where is it derived that one may take an oath to fulfill a mitzvah? How do I know that I could take an oath to fulfill a religious obligation? And they bring a quote from the Psalms. I've sworn and I've confirmed it. There's to observe your righteous ordinances. Since the poet in the Psalm says, you can swear and confirm that you're going to observe a mitzvah, it's okay for us to do that. But the Gemara challenges this and says, wait, aren't you already under oath from Mount Sinai? Or if you remember the rabbinic midrashim that Bnei Israel said, Naseh v'nishma, well, the midrashim on that say they took an oath. It's actually in the Tanakh, right in the Torah there, to say that at Mount Sinai, the Jewish people committed to uphold the mitzvot. So how can we take an oath to observe the mitzvah? The Gemara says, well, it teaches us this. It's permitted for a person to do so to motivate themselves. And I thought this was a real practical moment in Masechet Nedarim, the way in which we verbalize commitments to motivate us to do something that we want to do. And I think that happens a lot for people in the Jewish sphere. Here's an example, right? I have a lot of friends who say, like, next year, we're going to build a sukkah for the first time, right? And that fits into this passage. You could say, well, why does someone have to promise himself to build a sukkah? Like, that's what Jews are supposed to do on Sukkot. It's an obligation to have a sukkah on Sukkot, but we all know we're all on our different paths in Jewish life, and we all come to different moments of decision points. And sometimes it's speaking it aloud to your family, to your friends, to your neighbors, to people in synagogue. Next year, we're having a sukkah, and that's what's going to motivate you to do it. You might have the desire, but the desire itself might not be enough, but making a statement that commits you to a religious observance, to a Jewish action, right? I'm going to increase the tzedakah I give next year. I'm going to go to shul more. I'm going to, any of those things, the different commitments you might make, making them verbal commitments gives weight to them. And while technically, as the rabbis point out here, right, we carry these commitments to our people already, but it's the act of speaking them that sometimes motivates us to do. And just knowing that this is something that's part of our culture, part of our religion, part of what's expected, isn't enough. And it's the verbalization of that that helps us move forward and actually do something about. The text goes on, and Rav Giddel says that Rav said, one who says, I will rise early and study this chapter, or I will study this tractate, has taken a great vow to the God of Israel. So a verbal declaration to study a particular parak of Tanakh, a particular chapter from the Bible, a particular Masechet from the Talmud, or I guess in their days they were saying the Mishnah because the Talmud wasn't, the Gemara wasn't there yet. That's a commitment. That's a verbal commitment, like a vow. The Gemara comes with a very similar question that I had before. What do you mean? Aren't they already under oath, under obligation? This text mixes the vow and oath language, which I know some of you in the chat already pointed out. What's the difference between the different technical pieces? But here, the technical part doesn't matter for what I'm getting at. It's, the question here comes, how can you say you're committing to study? Aren't we already obligated to study Jewish texts? And the Gemara says, well, you can, if you desire, you can exempt yourself from the obligation to study Torah with the recitation of the Shema in the morning and the evening. And that's a reason why this oath might fall upon you, is because if you commit to studying these other chapters, you're upping your commitment to study. Right. So once again, we have a verbal commitment to study some specific texts, and they say, well, don't we all have to study? And what's the answer? Well, just by saying the Shema in the morning, you've studied some Torah, right? By if you have that tradition of saying the Shema in the morning and the Shema in the evening, that's all you have to do, and you've fulfilled the obligation to study Torah on a particular day. But this is a particular commitment to study a particular book, adds to your obligation, and the verbal commitment to that is oath-like, right? It has power, and if you commit to a study project, you should fulfill it. One last teaching. Rav Gidel said that Rav said, with regard to one who says to another, let us rise early and study this chapter. It's incumbent upon them to rise early, as it's stated. This is a verse from Ezekiel. And he, God, said to me, Ezekiel, arise and go forth into the plain, and there I will speak with you. Then I arose and went forth into the plain, and behold, the glory of the Lord stood there. So here we're dealing with not about what you're studying, but who you're studying with. I know many of us on this call, are studying Daf Yomi not alone, but with others. And the commitment to study with another is a serious one too. And if you make that verbal commitment, you're expected to keep it. And the teaching from Ezekiel, I kind of like this, that says, if you say to someone else, hey, let's get up early and let's meet, to study, for early coffee before work, or, half hour before minyan at shul, let's meet and study. The person who makes that pledge should go there first. And how do we know that? Well, God told Ezekiel to meet him on the plain, and God was going to share some words with Ezekiel. And when Ezekiel got there, God was already there. So since God was the inspiration for their chavruta, so to speak, for their learning together, God showed up first. So if you invite someone to study with you, you should be there. What I like about these texts for us, we've all made some sort of commitment. I don't know about you, but a couple of years in, I'm really feeling the commitment that I made to study Daf Yomi. I actually am thankful that My Jewish Learning has me write for them, because if I wasn't writing, I don't know that I would have stuck to my commitment to read. So thank you, My Jewish Learning, for being my partner in that. But we've made a commitment to study Torah, to do Daf Yomi, right? And it's no small task. Significant hours for 7+ years of our lives. And you might say, like, why do we need to make this commitment, right? We're obligated to study. Part of what Jews do is we make ourselves knowledgeable about Judaism. But sometimes it's the verbalizing of it. I'm going to study Daf Yomi this cycle that makes you do it. And that it's the speaking, the commitment to each other and to the text finds us in a relationship with God that says, I'm really going to study Torah. So on this day, when we mark the completion of one Masachet, I think it's important to note how, in some ways, we've fulfilled our own verbal commitment by finishing Masachet Nedarim. So I wish you Yasher Koach on that, and I hope that in the months and years to come, we gather again to celebrate the ways in which we've made good on our commitment to this important and complicated and lovely and joyful and sometimes confusing Jewish book from our bookshelf.
Thank you. I think your comments and your comments and the comments in the chat are really speaking to each other quite a lot, because I think when we talk about vowing, the rabbis vowing often places, as we saw in the tractate, an object in a position of I can't, or someone else can't benefit from it. But the way we think about vow, I hear a lot of people thinking about vowing in their lives and in these comments is about taking on an obligation to do something, right? Which is a little different technically than the rabbinic obligation, but that seems to have a lot of power and resonance. And a lot of you wrote in about how your vows, maybe not in the technical sense, maybe in the technical sense, to study Daf Yomi have been a huge motivator to keep up with it. And I even saw that one of you on the chat, I think it was you, Rob, vowed to return to this tractate in 7.5 years in the next cycle. So I want to ask the rabbis on the call, I'm not a rabbi, as we know, to give us a little psak. Is that an obligation if you type it into, is that the same as a verbal utterance if you type it into a Zoom chat? Or should we call Rob up to say it verbally in front of all of us?
He'll be at Kol Nidre. It'll be okay.
Actually, he was at Kol Nidre, right?
Oh, there you go. There you go.
Or maybe you were, Rob. Maybe you were. But either
That's
way,
where the
we decided
Rachel
to
on
be
the
here together in 7.5 years.
Rachel, I would just say when I think about Nedarim, it's not about the technical details because I feel like this Masachet is distant, right? We don't have the systems in place. We don't live in this world the way in which vows seem to be described as a cultural element. That's why I went to this text, because it's like, for me, it was, where does this apply to our lives? And Rob Giddel saying, you could step up and commit to studying Torah, and that's vow-like. So, I've come to know Rob. He's a regular, participant in these calls. So I think if he says it, my sense is he's going to make good on sticking with Daf Yomi the next cycle. But less than whether it's technical, you technically a vow or not, I'm interested in is how does that commitment motivate him to make good on what he wants to do? And while yes, it's not going back to what vows were once, it is a way that I think this Masechet lives for us today.
Yeah.
It also could be a machloket, a disagreement between the mystical Zohar and the poskim, the authorities, because in prayer, the Zohar says prayer in the heart is considered prayer. In psak halacha and halacha, you have to actually mouth the prayers, and ideally you hear the prayers that you're saying. It comes up also with in the shower. Can you think Torah? You actually can think Torah in the shower, not in the bathroom, but not in the toilet. But my son Judah paskins that if you have a shower curtain or a door, it's not the bathroom. So you can think Torah, but saying it is an issue. And likewise, before you've said the blessing on the Torah in the morning, you can think Torah, maybe write it, but not say it. So there is some value to actually saying something. There's something significant. We're always worried about our kids texting all the time and not saying things to each other. So it might be that there really is a big difference between something in the chat room and really saying something. Who knows?
Thank you. There was a comment here. Yes. Okay. So here's an interesting comment I thought that hadn't occurred to me while I read this, but Mark B wants to know, maybe you guys have a thought on this. Why don't we just say a reduced version of Kol Nidre every day or every week or every month to annul future vows? Why do we do it once a year? Would it be different if we said it every day? Would that keep things at top of our mind?
Have at it. There's no prohibition, I think, against nullifying your vows each day, if that will help you. Although the rabbis
you can't help yourself and they slip out all the time.
Right. The rabbis that were in many generations were uncomfortable with Kol Nidre as just an institution, but that it's a great victory of the people won out in terms of the importance of this public moment where we acknowledge we're not going to get it right and we need to nullify our vows. And I don't know, there's something to be said to doing it more.
I didn't know that was a rabbis versus the people kind of thing. I thought the rabbis wanted to do Kol Nidre because they didn't trust the people. Have I got that wrong?
Kol Nidre might not really work. It's a complicated, and there are different versions of Kol Nidre to kind of fix it and make it work. But it's beautiful prayer. But it is again Amcha. It's the folks.
Yeah. It does strike me that I've been to Kol Nidre every year of my life. I think it has this enormous emotional power. And I don't think until this year I really understood what it was about. And why it had all this emotional power. Okay. Rabbanit Fruchter, let's toggle over to you because at least one or two people have asked us to address the issue of women in this tractate, which is taken up at the very end. And I know that's at least part of what you are going to be. And also you were going to be talking to us about why vowing is dangerous and a problem in general. So I think that's you will be able to address some of those comments by what you are going to say.
Great. And I will also finish out the tractate after my teaching. I'm just grinning while looking at the chat here. I am seeing this published as a sefer, as a book. After we finish the cycle, I want to see all of your words in a book. It'd be so great. These are amazing comments, really, really amazing. I want to address two things briefly. One is around the question of gender, and two, it's connected to vowing in general and concluding this tractate. While I was preparing to teach Masechet Nedarim, I teach a Daf Yomi class, I was looking at reasons, like Rachel, you began to speak about why it's situated in the section having to do with women. And one approach made me shudder a little bit. One approach that I read was, well, because women are loose with their words, and therefore they'll go ahead and they'll vow right and left. And I actually think, who was it in the chat? Sylvia Klein wrote something in the chat about weaponizing in a marriage, using a vow. And it just made me sit back and imagine how the world was seen between men and women, maybe differently than it is now. That in some ways, if we recall from Masechet Shabbat, if we learned that tractate together, the rabbis believed that women were their own people, right? Like their own thing, right? And in this week's Torah portion, the last 2 weeks in synagogue, we've been thinking about this Exodus business, and many of the heroines of the Exodus story perform their amazing heroic work through speech and through subversive speech. Okay. So when I think about women and talking and kind of craftily using their words, I also think about the way that women historically in Jewish tradition and teachings have used their words in subversive ways to make change. So while every time we see, here's why women are terrible when they vow in the tractate, it's really jarring. It's also a reminder where the seat of women's power was in their words. So that's just where I'm holding the idea of women. Now, vows in general, I'm going to go ahead and connect it to the end of the tractate. I'm thinking back to this quote that came up throughout the tractate. Daf 22, I believe, was the first time it was made, that making a neder is like making a vow is like building a private altar, and fulfilling that vow is like making a sacrifice on that private altar. So it's better that you go ahead and annul the vow, regardless of what you do. Don't make a vow. And Rabbi Goldberg, I really loved what you shared, and it helped me think about the difference between a positive vow of commitment and a negative vow of making something forbidden, right? So it's different to say, I'm going to sanctify this money, which is off limits to me because it's going to charity, and saying, I'm never going to drink wine ever again, right? Those are like two different kinds of ways to make a vow. Making something forbidden and off limits to you because of whatever, because of a marital dispute, because you want to, I don't know, change your diet, and then making a specific activity vow related because it is generative, because it will bring more learning into your life. Those are different things. So we're going to actually talk in Masechet Nazir in a few minutes tomorrow about that kind of abstention vow, where you take a vow and you say, this is off limits to me. So I'm going to agree with Rabbi Goldberg that there's a kind of positive vow and a commitment kind of vow that can really be empowering. But take a look with me at the end of the tractate, and I think together we can start to see what might be so icky or dangerous about vows. There's also just, getting to the bigger question, there's something really cool about doing Hatarat Nedarim, this act of annulling one's vows on the eve of Rosh Hashanah. Has anyone ever done this? On the morning of Rosh Hashanah, you stand in the synagogue and three random people sit there and listen to you annul your vows. This is like another version of Kol Nidre, you're annulling your vows. I always felt really spiritual while that was happening, when these three random people were sitting in a row and they're saying, your vows are annulled, your vows are annulled, your vows are annulled. And I actually remember kind of in the last few years getting a little bit verklempt, a little bit choked up. I'm like, what is spiritual about this moment? Well, like many of you have said in the chat, making a vow is godlike. Annulling it is also really powerful, because ultimately what we say with a vow annulment is, it is not in my control to make religion. It is not in my control to decide what's forbidden and what's permitted. And actually, I live in this comfy, beautiful cocoon that God has given me, right, around what is forbidden and what is permitted. And actually, annulling the vow is an acknowledgement of that humility. Let's go together to the end of the tractate. We are going to begin where it says, Hahu no'ef, towards the end of the tractate on Daf 91b, just a few lines from the bottom. You can follow along on Safaria or just listen, and you will chuckle, I guarantee you, if you have not yet learned the end of this tractate. Hahu no'ef, there was a certain adulterer, Da'al legabe dehahi intita, who went to visit his married lover, okay? Ha'ata gavra, the man of the house, the husband, came home. Slik no'if itiv b'chlai bava. The adulterer went and hid himself behind a door. Hava machasan tachle taman v'ta'iminun chivya. There was some cress, like an herb, lying there on the table in the house. And the adulterer, earlier when they were engaged in some things, saw that a snake had gone and deposited some venom in that cress, in that herb. And the husband, the master of the house, was interested in having some salad, okay, without the woman's knowledge here. Okay, the master of the house wanted to have a snack without the woman knowing about the snack. Amar le hahu no'ef, the certain adulterer went ahead and said, right? Don't go ahead and eat that cress. A snake has deposited some venom in it. All right, so you can imagine he's like coming out from behind the door in a towel, and he's like, no, don't eat that cress, right? So something is going on here. And Amar Rava asks, we're trying to figure out the following question. Is this woman now permitted to her husband or not, provided that her husband is a Kohen, a priest? We want to know if we have to assume that guy in towel warning about snake venom meant that actually he and his wife had been together or not. We want to know. So Amar Rava says, Intate Sharia, no, your wife is permitted to you. You don't have to assume they did anything. Im ise da'avad isura, because if they had done something, you know what he would have wanted? He would have wanted you to drop dead, right? So he can go ahead and be with your wife. As it is written in the book of Ezekiel, for they have committed adultery and blood is on their hands, indicating that adultery will often lead to murder because adulterous person will be interested in your death. Okay, so that was Rava's opinion. And then the Gemara says, Pshita, that's obvious. Mahu detema, what is Rav coming to teach you? All right, here's where I'm going to connect it all back together and maybe teach something about why vows aren't so great. Let's go. So, Isura Avad, we needed Rava to tell us that it's okay for the man and the woman to remain married, because if you say that the man, in fact, did do something with this woman, and the reason that he said to the husband that he shouldn't eat the salad and saved his life, was that it was preferable for him that the husband should not die. Why? Because maybe he didn't want the man of the house to die. Maybe he wanted the man of the house to live and breathe and be well. Why? Because of this quote in Proverbs, stolen waters are sweet and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. Meaning it's better for her to remain forbidden. He wouldn't want to, do something with a woman who's available, right? That's better. So, and then we go ahead and we say, Hadran Allah, Ve'elu Nedarim, Uslika la Masecha Nedarim. We conclude Nedarim. We basically say, you do not need to make the world forbidden to you in order for life to be spicy. In order for life with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for life with God, for life on this earth to be beautiful, to be appealing, our mitzvot and the way that we act in the world, it's meant to hold us in the mundane, in the everyday. We don't need to go ahead and, call out the things that are forbidden just to make them more appealing to us. So just like a little lesson at the end of the tractate that really struck me. And don't eat cress anymore because a snake probably deposited some venom in it. That is also a lesson. Hadran, we conclude Nedarim. I'll pass it to you, Rabbi Goldberg, for the Hadran.
All right. As we finish Masechet Nedarim and we promise to come back to it, I'm thinking about the theme of Nedarim as I say this, because as we were chatting before this started, you like Masechet Nedarim? I think it was, of the four of us on the, here today, I was the most down on it. But now as I say these words, it's my commitment to come back. And you guys are all witness that Bli Neder, I'll revisit Nedarim another time too. Adran alach Masechet Nedarim v'adrach alan. Datan alach Masechet Nedarim v'datan alan. No lo nitna shem minach Masechet Nedarim. V'lo titna shem minan. Lo be'alma hadem v'lo be'alma da'ate. Yehi ratzon mefanecha Adonai Eloheinu v'Elokei avotenu shetehei toratcha umanutecha Olam hazeh v'tiyeh imanu l'olam haba. Anina bar Papa, Rami bar Papa, Nachman bar Papa, Achai bar Papa, Abba Mari bar Papa, Rafram bar Papa, Rachish bar Papa, Surcha bar Papa, Adar bar Papa, Daru bar Papa. Areb Adonai Eloheinu et divrei toratcha b'finu v'fiyamcha be'Yisrael v'niyah nachnu v'tzatza'enu v'tzatza'ei tzatza'enu v'tzatza'ei amcha beit Yisrael kulanu yodei shemecha v'lamdei toratecha lishma. Mo'evai techanchemi mitzvotecha ki le'olam hili yehi libi tamim b'chukecha leman lo ivosh le'olam lo eshkach pikudecha kivam chayitani baruch ata Adonai lamdeni chukecha amen 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 sela va'ed modim anachnu lefanecha Adonai Eloheinu v'Elokei avotenu shesamta chalkenu miyoshvei beit hamidrash v'lo samta chalkenu miyoshvei koranot she'anu mashkimim v'hem mashkimim. Anu mashkimim lidivrei Torah v'hem mashkimim lidvarim b'telim. Anu amelim v'hem amelim. Anu amelim mekabelim schar v'hem amelim v'einam mekabelim schar. Anu ratzim v'hem ratzim. Anu ratzim l'chayei olam haba v'hem ratzim lever shachat shene'emar. V'ata Elohim toridem lever shachat. Anshe damim u'mirma lo yechatzu yamehem v'ani avtach b'ach. Yehi ratzon mefanecha Adonai Eloheinu kishem shazartani l'sayem Masechet Nedarim ken tazreini latchil masachtot u'sfarim acherim l'saymam lelmod u'lelamed l'shmor l'asot u'lekayem kol divrei Talmud Toratecha be'ava u'zchut kol atanaim v'amoraim v'talmidei chachamim yamod li l'zari shelo tamush haTorah mipi u'mipi zari v'zera zari ad olam v'yitkayem bi v'hit halcha Behit halecha tanche odcha b'shokbecha tishmor alecha v'hakitzota hi tashichecha kivi yerbu yamecha v'yosifu lecha shnot chaim orech yamim b'yamina u'v'smola osher v'kavod Adonai oz ha'mo yitein Adonai yivarech et amo b'shalom. Now I turn things over to Rabbi Lopatin for the Kaddish.
Thank you, Rav Elliot and Rav Dasi. So special Kaddish, as you know, that's only said at a Siyyum. There you go, you get to see my tummy, but I'm standing up. So you know what, I'll sit down. But my mind is standing up. So of course, the hope that we have after and by these incredible teachings of my colleagues and of all of you and Rachel, also my colleague, so that we really hope for a different world, a miraculous world of peace and return and everything good, and Jerusalem rebuilt as a city of peace and hope and love. And which it's in the process, and then also just adding the part of Al Yisrael V'Rabbanan. This is a Kaddish D'Rabbanan, blessing all those who study Torah. So all of you are blessed in this Kaddish, special Kaddish. Yitkara v'kara shemei rabba ve'amadu ativ v'chana v'chaya meitel askal chaya almalim they kardu shaleim v'shachal hechalei v'gavim l'achar pulchan anu chrame ara v'latava pulchan adishmaya la'atre v'yamlich kudsha b'richu v'alotei v'karei v'chayachon v'machar v'chayachon v'yisrael v'agala v'bizman karim v'imru amen. Yehi shemei rabba v'barach v'olam omel maya Yibarach v'yishtabach v'yitbarach v'yitbarach v'yinasei v'yidanav v'yidalev v'yidalav shemim v'shavrichu Le'elam v'yinkom v'chadav v'shivadav v'yivadav v'chamata adam v'ram v'alman v'imru amen Al Yisrael v'Rabbanan v'al Talmideim v'al kol Talmidei Talmidim v'al kol man de'askim v'oraita. Everyone being oisek, learning Torah, v'batra dain, v'yibachol atar atar, wherever they are. Yehi lahon alachon shlama rabba, china v'chisa v'rachamei v'chayei arichei, long lives. V'kanami kodam avod mishmai v'aravim amen. Yehi shlama rabba mishmai v'chayim tovim aleinu v'achos yovim amen. O se shalom v'ramav v'yaseh v'rachamav shalom aleinu. Thou call Yisrael v'imru amen. In the merit of this beautiful Torah, Masechet Nedarim, may God bring peace to our world as God brings peace to the heavens.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for a spirited discussion. Thank you to all of you for your really thoughtful and interesting comments and the things that you shared with us. Always a pleasure to learn with all of you. And tomorrow morning, we will turn the page to Tractate Nazir. We won't entirely be leaving Nedarim insofar as the Nazir takes a very particular vow to abstain from grape products and wine and alcohol, and also from corpse impurity and from hair cutting. And we'll talk about why, and we'll find out what's special about that particular kind of vow tomorrow and for the next 2 months. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you, Rabbi Goldberg, Rabbi Fruchter, Rabbi Lopatin, for all your wise words and teachings. And we will see all of you very soon.
Esher koach, mazel tov, shkoyach.
Off, everybody. A pleasure to be here.